to prompt and to promote the process. For a decade, the forums operated without a great hitch. In fact, the Orange Revolution in 2005 openly accelerated matters. But in 2010, Yanukovych, I was about to call him President, but Yanukovych, with the aid of his buddy Putin's FSB machinations, took power. Within a year, it became clear that Ukraine was regressing, losing its budding Euro-Atlantic attributes. At that point in 2000, the Quest series organizers took to tracking the distressing phenomena with a parallel device, Ukraine's annual report card, aimed at carefully monitoring Ukraine's progress or regress in 6 categories associated with advanced or developed nation statehood: robust democratic practices, mature market economics, ever greater general security, ever greater energy security, viable social cohesion, and established national identity. With the Euro-Atlantic, with the Euromaidan in late 2013-14, first overthrowing the Yanukovych regime and then carving its Euro-Atlantic ambitions right into the Constitution, it looked like the Quest series organizers could jettison the annual report card. All was back to its place. There was no need to have a dark-thinking companion. But Putin did not intend, as we now all know or are aware, to let matters rest so easily. So in 2014, he launched first a hybrid war against Ukraine and then followed up in 2022 with a full-scale war, determined to do by military force what he couldn't achieve by FSB stealth, i.e. stop Ukraine's Western vector choice. The war, whether hybrid or full, was indeed just as capable of disbalancing or upending Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic ambitions as Yanukovych's authoritarian gambit had been. As a result, the organizers decided to hold on to the practice of providing Ukraine with an annual report card to complement the Quest series. In the last 10 years, and we have the math using our 5-to-1 scale, A to F, with 5 or A being real progress, a C or 3 being stuck in mud, and 1 or F meaning real regress. Ukraine has averaged between B minus and C plus, a kind of 3-4 out of 5 over those years. Last year, a tough one on the security front with aid to Ukraine in the air for 6 months due to fight in U.S. Congress, Ukraine's overall average grade actually went up to 3.7, B plus over B, with only security lagging, and an F for the occupied territories. Incidentally, social cohesion and national identity ended up in the A minus B plus category. So in short, Ukraine seemed to stay true to its Western vector professions expressed 25 years ago. The Russians had not been able to force Ukraine off that course. So on to this year, and this is where we begin. And all I can say is our panelists have gotten the rules of the game, but I will shortly tell everybody that it's basically the moderator gets 10 minutes, but broken up into his various functions as discussion leader. Then 3 panelist graders get about 10 minutes apiece. Then the special commentator gets 8 to 10 minutes as well. Then at some point, and I'm going to ask every single one of the our moderators to keep to this, harvest 1 round of questions, and then set that round of questions to our discussants and have them give answers, their individual answers, and then at the end, they provide their grade. And now the grades, that's where I end and hand it over to Ambassador Taylor. The grades are, as we said, 5 is the highest. It's real progress. 4, some progress. Stuck in the middle is 3, neither going up or down. And then 2 and 1, you can assume regress and real regress. And that's it. That's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at a Ukraine that is at a vital crossroads. And every single panel is going to be very important for us. So with that, I hope that I didn't take that much time. But Ambassador Taylor, it's all yours.
Walter, thank you. Thank you. It's a delight to be back here. I really appreciate it, especially with this panel on this topic. I will, you say 10 minutes for my total, so I will just use a little bit right at the beginning to say that Ukraine, as Walter has described, is fighting for its existence, and it needs to win that fight in order to do all the things that we're talking about grading. So that's got to be the first priority. That's got to be the top priority. They need to win this war. And a lot depends on us, and we can talk. I'm sure we'll talk about that today. A lot depends on the United States. A lot depends on Europe. The Ukrainians are showing that they can prevail, but it depends on us. But the second thing I would say before turning to this panel is that we have to be modest. I mean, the United States has got its own challenge. Europeans have challenges, and we're not fighting for our existence. So in this grading business, I'm a little uncomfortable with grading from where we sit, but nonetheless, I will follow your instructions and we will do this. So this first panel, robust democratic politics, assessing Ukraine's progress or regress. We've got people that you all know. Steve, Orest, and Katie have been here before. Bo, we're glad to have you here as well. No introductions necessary, I don't think, but and we'll just go in the order that we've listed here. That is Steve at IRI, Bo at Vice President of Rebuilding Ukraine Association, also West Point grad, Harvard. Yes. So Bo will go second. Orest, long-time observer, many grades, Orest, you have given out there. So we'll do this. And special commentator is Katie Fox from NDI. So we were delighted to have this crew here. And Steve, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you, Ambassador. Tak? All right, thank you. Thank you all for coming today. And again, it's an honor to be invited, Vladko. Thank you for organizing this important event. Okay, we're going to talk about elections, and we're going to have to talk about elections in the abstract because we all know that elections aren't scheduled, cannot be scheduled pursuant to the Constitution and election laws of Ukraine. What we can talk about are some of the facts related to elections, some of the challenges of elections when they might come, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the political intrigue, the politics of who might compete and what might happen. So, sir, first with the facts. As you all know, no elections in the offing. The Ukrainian government was under pressure at some point to hold elections. The president's mandate has expired, parliament's expired. And in fact, Russia was using this fact as a ploy to avoid negotiating with President Zelensky, claiming that he was illegitimate because his mandate has expired. Thankfully, Europe and the United States all recognize this presidency is valid, same thing with Parliament. But again, nothing is scheduled, and everything related to elections is contingent upon the lifting of martial law. And that in turn is contingent upon some sort of negotiation, some sort of settlement of the conflict, which again, a few weeks ago was a hot topic. And I think there was a lot of discussion about elections at that point in time. I think that discussion has cooled a bit because the discussions over negotiations, quite frankly, have stalled for a number of reasons that I won't get into now, but are well known to you. So more facts. The Ukrainian people, according to IRI polling data, do not want to see elections held during time of war. 82% in successive polls said no elections until after the conclusion of this war. So again, President Zelensky rightfully heeded the public call, resisted demands, requests from the West to hold elections. We think that was the right call. But there are many challenges as to when elections might be called. And again, these facts are well known to you. First of all is the challenges of who gets to vote. UN estimates between 6 and 8 million Ukrainians residing in EU countries. We assess that that's 4 to 4.5 million people of voting age. Right there, that number is dispositive of the outcome of any presidential or parliamentary election. The number's so huge. Secondly is the IDPs, people who are displaced internally. Where do they vote? How do they vote? Huge questions. And then third, servicemen voting, voting on the points of contact. These are all very, very challenging issues. I'll go back to the EU, the Ukrainian citizens residing in EU countries. We have a program in Moldova for last year's presidential elections where we turned out Moldovan citizens residing in EU countries, but it's a totally different scale. We were targeting some 750,000 Moldovan citizens. We turned out 420,000 in the second round of the presidential election there. Very successful program. But in terms of scale, you're talking about 4 million voters as opposed to 700,000 voters. Nonetheless, we did have funding from USAID to embark on a program similar to what we did in Moldova. But now, as you know, funding is a big question mark moving forward. We have funding to continue our programs in Ukraine and prepare for elections, but right now, not for this EU diaspora vote.
So Steve, you do have funding to prepare for elections?
We do.
From USAID?
From the National Endowment for Democracy is our current funder. We are seeking private funds because these elections are going to be so important. We think that we'll be successful in obtaining private funding. Again, funding from the US government directly is a question mark right now, but we remain hopeful that due to the importance of these elections, that there will be additional funding from the State Department once it completes its reorganization, to put it that way. So again, many, many challenges. The cost of elections. I've heard estimates from the CEC to administer an election between $100 million and $200 million, which Ukraine simply doesn't have. When asked about this, I think President Zelensky answered appropriately when he said, I'm not going to take money away from the armed forces that are defending our country and divert that to funding the administration of elections. And to Western countries who were requesting that Ukraine hold elections, his response is, if you want elections, then we invite you and your country to fund these elections. Again, I think that's the appropriate response. But again, cost is a big factor in these elections, and where that money will come from, our expectation is some or part will be from foreign sources. Okay, we don't have any data. Let's get to the politics because I'm told I only have 4 minutes left. The most interesting part, the politics, right, Governor? So for the last 3 years, IRI has been doing polling to assist President Zelensky in decision-making, whether that was prosecution of the war, EU membership, NATO membership, negotiations, very important policy-related questions. We have not asked a single political question in the last 3 years, simply because the focus has to be, as Ambassador said, winning the war and not on politics. But for the first time in 3 years, we're going to be out in the field in 2 weeks with a national poll where we will be asking political questions. So we'll be running ballot test questions. They will run through a lot of political related questions, and we'll brief that out in late July or early August to people in government, but also the various political parties. Again, there's lots of unknowns. No one is really sure the order of elections. I'm hearing primarily from government sources that presidential elections would be held first, followed by parliamentary elections. Local elections might be held either in between or possibly simultaneous with one of those two elections. Again, this is all very much in doubt. So we're going to have some polling data that will give us some idea of the various support that candidates might receive. You've seen a lot of speculation. I mean, we have current political parties, Klitschko, Poroshenko, Tymoshenko. We expect new parties to emerge, and we're prepared to work with them. Lots of speculation about the Ukrainian ambassador in London as to what his intentions are. So again, lots of unknown questions. We just simply don't know. President Zelensky's intentions also unclear. We'll have to wait and see. Again, everything is contingent upon lifting of martial law, and that is contingent upon a peace settlement. And again, we will be prepared to do party training and campaign training in Ukraine with our NED funding. Our hope is that we will receive additional private funding or other sources so we can work with the diaspora. Again, IRI polling indicates that the vast majority of Ukrainians in country want to see their fellow citizens residing in Europe be able to vote. Very, very strong support for that. So we want to make sure that that, and again, if that doesn't happen, that could raise questions about the legitimacy of this election. And that could affect Ukraine's EU accession talks. Very important for elections whenever they happen to be well organized, well administered, and seem to be representative of the Ukrainian people. And again, if you are omitting 4.5 million people from voting, that does raise questions about legitimacy. So these are some of the many, many questions that the Central Election Commission, the executive branch, and Parliament will face, because this will probably require some tweaking of the election law, which might also be criticized because it would happen so close to election. But again, these are new facts that have arisen that the Parliament's going to have to deal with to pass legislation to enable some of these groups that I've mentioned to be able to vote in the elections. I've exceeded my time, so I'll yield the floor back to the ambassador.
Steve, no, you did fine. You're very, very disciplined, and we'll all follow your good example. So Bo, you're up, and you've got I don't know however much time you have, 8 minutes. Very good. And we can't hear you. Now we can't hear you, but we'll be able to hear you soon. Now we can hear you, Bo. Nope.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So sorry about the technical glitch. Well, I'm going to talk about post-war reconstruction efforts, and I want to start out with something, a quote from my grandfather, and one of his many quotes was "Chrobak chroni не знає, як добре яблуко смакує," which means a worm in horseradish doesn't know how good an apple tastes. And I'm referring to this in terms of sometimes if you're inside a broken system, you don't know what a good one looks like. You think that's normal. So a couple of days ago, I was talking to Walter, and he told me that you got to come up with a grade. And much like the ambassador, I was like, well, you know, how the hell am I going to do that? And I told Walter, okay, let me think about it. I'll sleep on it. And I sat down in my armchair, poured myself a bourbon, and was pondering a grade for Ukraine. And I dozed off and found myself in a basement in Foggy Bottom behind a crappy old gray government dented desk. And my phone rings, and it's the secretary's chief of staff, a guy named Joe, who for some reason I don't like. I think he's a McKinsey guy. And he says, the boss needs you upstairs in 10 minutes to talk about the $200 billion Ukraine reconstruction package. And I'm like, why me? And he's like, don't be cute. It's your desk. Hangs up. I'm in full panic mode. And I'm thinking, I mean, there must be like 8 or 9 huge IDIQs, thousands of task orders, 6 US agencies, a half dozen Ukrainian agencies. You know, they barely talk to each other. There's no way I can roll up an ROI in 10 minutes. And Joe knows that. And the phone rings again. I pick it up, and it's Leonid Kravchuk, the first president of Ukraine. And he just says, hey, Bogdan, maємо to, що маємо, and he clicks. And he goes, wait, is Kravchuk in this with Joe? Are they both setting me up? Or is this a warning? And before I can think about it, the phone rings again, and it's my grandfather. And he says, you know, Chrobak chroni не знає, яке смачне яблуко. Talks about the horseradish and the apple. I wake up and I think, it's the apple. It's about the apple. And I've tasted the apple. So let me tell you what I'm proposing. let's not manage when we come to the reconstruction phase of Ukraine like it's 1993 with spreadsheets, PDF invoices, audit trails that are 6 months behind the actions, agencies in silo. We can move forward with a secure AI-powered digital oversight model that gives us real-time visibility portfolio on every dollar and every contract and every milestone that's happening in Ukraine. And we can know when things are going sideways. Instead of doing an autopsy of a dead patient, we can correct the patient and not waste any money. Now, this isn't some kind of crazy moonshot technical dream. The tools exist today and they're being used. Basic tools like Microsoft Project, Kaua, Primavera that are already FedRAMP certified and are being used by agencies like the Department of Transportation, the Army Corps of Engineers. They can pull live data from project sites, contractors, Ukrainian ministry, and we can track U.S. task orders. All these things can be rolled up automatically into a unified dashboard. So if this theoretical Joe guys asks you what's going on in Ukraine, can you give me an ROI? You can provide accountability. Are things being done on time, on budget, by specification? It brings accountability shared across contractors and both governments, and its actual cost will be less than a percentage point of the total project. Now, can Ukraine run a project like this? 100% yes. Give you for an example, the Ukrainian IT sector last year in the middle of the war generated $6.4 billion of revenue. There's over 300,000 IT professionals in Ukraine that are working with the largest companies in the world, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, SaaS, and they're building to these standards using project tools like that for digital accountability. That's why they get the contracts. Give you another example. There's a situational awareness model that they're using on Ukraine's battlefield. Nothing like the West has. As a matter of fact, NATO and the US is looking to model it after. It's called Delta Situational Awareness, where they're pulling in battlefield analysis from drones, civilians giving intelligence, satellites imagery, et cetera, and giving Ukraine the fastest, what they call kill chain, the time from identifying the enemy, making sure it's the correct target, and then destroying it. So the Ukrainians can perform things to Western standards using modern digital tools. It's just that we need to bring the expertise from the IT sector and what they've been using in the military over to the construction sector, so they get real-time digital project management capability. So kind of what's the big idea that we're proposing at Rebuilding Ukraine is that U.S. aid should be used not only at building roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, infrastructure in Ukraine, but should upgrade how aid itself is managed. And that means real-time tracking of budgets, schedules, compliances, fraud prevention through transparency, tools Ukrainians can own and extend to other domains of governance, align them with EU standards. We think that the biggest threat to long-term U.S. support to Ukraine, isn't what's happening in the battlefield. It's what will happen after the war and the bureaucratic fog that will ensure And we think tools like this that bring transparency and accountability and a dashboard to prove it are available today and can be implemented. We'd like to see these tools be used as a precondition to aid. So that's kind of what the apple looks like. And so, you know, Ukraine's going to be a huge reconstruction zone. And if we manage the aid and the construction using modern digital management tools, I think we'll be able to look at our investment, the US investments into Ukraine, and be able to prove how effective it is and be able to state that we're getting an ROI. And all the people that are, again, by the way, we think it will help also reform how business is done in Ukraine. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Good to have your grandfather's wisdom. We should keep this in mind. And Orest, over to you.
I'm fine, thank you. Do you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. What's sometimes forgotten in any discussion of peace proposals and peace plans concerning the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine is that there are real live human beings inhabiting those lands. So it's not just about land, it's about people. This is sometimes overlooked. It's about what we in the OSC world, which I was part of for a long time, is called the human dimension, broadly speaking. Thanks, Steve. Broadly speaking, that things like human rights and rule of law and democracy are also necessary for lasting peace and security. So let me provide a bit of an overview on what it's like for those living under Muscovite occupation. Since February 2022, Russia's military, as we all know, has killed thousands of civilians. It's wiped out cities, numerous villages, most notorious case being Mariupol, which 500,000 called home before thousands were killed, hundreds of thousands fled, and more than 90% of the buildings were demolished. Homes, hospitals, schools throughout the occupied territories have been destroyed, infrastructures, roads, bridges, rail links, and the like. Rich farmland laid to waste, industrial sites shut down, monuments, including to the Holodomor, for instance, museums, libraries, churches, destroyed or looted. Clearly, all this destruction has made life very difficult for the people there. And by the way, Russian occupation authorities, instead of spending on civilian infrastructure and improving the everyday lives of people, including for healthcare, for instance, prioritize spending on military infrastructure and things like propaganda. Now, millions have fled, although it's important to emphasize that those who stayed behind did so often for personal reasons or try to hold on to their homes, and not because they welcomed Russian rule. In fact, thousands have bravely resisted, but that's a subject for another discussion. The population in occupied lands, including Crimea, has dropped by more than half compared to 2014, and in the 4 oblasts, non-Crimean oblasts, from 6.4 million in January 20. Okay, thanks. About 3 to 3.5 million now, so that's quite a precipitous drop. And that doesn't include Russians who are coming in to colonize those lands too, so the decline be even steeper. Now, human rights in the occupied territories are in many respects comparable to, yes, North Korea. Freedom House, in its latest Freedom of the World report covering last year, using a scale of 1 to 100, gave the Russian occupied territories an astounding -2 score for political rights and a 1 score for civil liberties. That's the lowest of the 195 countries and 13 territories covered. Russia, just for comparison, got a 12. They're definitely in the not free category. And Ukraine got a 51 score remaining in the partly free category, which it's been for all but 3 years since it became independent. The only exceptions, the 3 years being an exception, is when our moderator was U.S. Ambassador to Kiev. This was during the late Yushchenko period. So
There was clear correlation.
in my mind, absolutely, yeah. But anyhow, so what justifies the pitiful scores in the Russia-controlled lands? The terror tactics, torture, brutal treatment, ill treatment of civilians and prisoners of war, including sexual violence, forced disappearances, extrajudicial killings. Fair trials, that's a fiction. There's no rule of law, really only rule of cruelty. Victims, local leaders, journalists, activists, anyone daring to oppose Russian rule, those even believed to be harboring pro-Ukrainian views have been intimidated, harassed, or much, much worse, like being sent to the basement, which means filtration camps or detention centers. Okay, I get it closer and then I'm afraid of it. Okay, but then, okay. So now Russia claims that the 4 seized oblasts, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, are annexed based on farcical referendums that the international community roundly has condemned, though they don't even fully control those, all of them. And in their non-starter peace proposals, they want even those parts that they don't control, which would relegate, by my rough count, at least 1.5 million more additional Ukrainians to Russian domination. Democratic norms and practices, non-existent. And just as Russia's occupation isn't recognized as legitimate under international law, neither are all of Russia's repressive laws, administrative structures that have been brutally imposed by Moscow on an unwilling population. Needless to say, elementary rights and freedoms like freedom of speech, association, assembly are totally absent. Independent media has been brutally silenced, really. Religious freedoms have been eviscerated, severely restricted for all but the Moscow-affiliated Orthodox Church. You know, the targeted religions include the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Protestants, especially evangelicals. And some of that, a lot of that perhaps is due to the fact that they're associated with being tied with America. Jews, Muslims, obviously Crimean Tatars, who, you know, you could do an entire conference on their suffering since 2014. So the persecution of all these groups that form Ukraine's rich religious and national minority fabric are part and parcel of Russia's overall attempts to extinguish Ukraine's identity. So not only do we see the imposition of Russian political control, but also of Russian language and culture, the eradication of Ukrainian identity, it's all of its various manifestations, expressions of that identity. That's a principal goal of the Kremlin, and it is being carried out in a very systematic, deliberate manner. The Russians, as we all know, have inflicted unimaginable suffering on children who've been subject to heinous crimes. You know, we all know about the forcible deportations and abductions of tens of thousands of Ukrainian children to Russia, other parts of occupied territories, and lesser extent Belarus. But less well known may be the various ways that these kids are subjected to Russification. School curriculums glorify Russian imperialism. They demonize all things Ukrainian. Best not to be caught speaking Ukrainian or wearing a vyshyvanka. At schools and summer camps, kids undergo military training, propaganda, ideological brainwashing designed to turn them into like little Russian robots and future soldiers to fight the so-called Nazis and the evil West. And yes, there is military conscription in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. Then there's been a forcible issuance of Russian passports, passportization, which by now is pretty much getting to be complete. I won't go into all the coercive measures. They used to try to achieve that. But a recent decree states that Ukrainian citizens in occupied lands must leave by September 10th in a few months, unless they obtain Russian passports or register as foreigners. So think about that for a minute. Without the passport of the occupying country, you effectively become a foreigner in your own country. Property rights non-existent, arbitrary seizures, confiscations, particularly impacting the millions of Ukrainians who have fled these lands. It's crystal clear that millions of Ukrainians still living in occupation live in a climate of fear, reminiscent not just of Soviet times, but more specifically, I would argue, Stalinist times. As Nobel Peace Prize laureate Alexander Matvichuk has said, an end to the fighting where Russia maintains control over the territories is not peace, but continuation of war in a different form. And finally, the prospects of long-lasting peace and even a temporary ceasefire, let's not kid ourselves, but they look very dim at the present time. The plight of Ukrainians under Russian domination will remain difficult. What we can do for them is limited, but one thing we can do is, keep raising awareness, speaking out on their behalf. The bottom line is we shouldn't forget about these people. Thanks.
Grim picture. Katie.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Walter. And again, thank you, Walter, for continuing to invite me to come to this, even though I have for years persisted in saying that we do not have the right to judge Ukrainian democracy. And I'm going to say it is especially, as Ambassador Taylor said, especially true now when the state of US democracy would be a very legitimate subject for our discussion. Nevertheless, I think it is important to take every opportunity to remind ourselves of how important democracy is to Ukrainians and how important it is part of what they are fighting for in this war. NDI, like IRI, does polling in Ukraine, but like IRI, we don't have numbers right now. We will put our poll in the field a little bit later, and we'll have numbers to share in September. But what we have done is we've been doing polling in Ukraine for 10 years, and we have done a comparative study of 10 years, including 25 waves of polling to look at some data over time. And I want to show some of that to you. Next. Okay, so here it's the research questions. The one that's most important for our purposes is how resilient is public support in Ukraine for democracy, European and Euro-Atlantic integration, and then what factors shape political trust and citizen engagement in Ukraine. I have a big deck, and I'm only going to show you a little bit of it, but we can share the full deck if anyone's interested. Next. Okay, this is the slide I really want everybody to take home with them. Take a picture, whatever. How important is it that Ukraine becomes a fully functioning democracy? We've asked this every time. The numbers are consistently very, very high. And as you see, they got higher during the full-scale war, an indication that this war is about values as well as territory. And Ukrainians understand that. You can't see it on this slide, but the numbers have also changed in that over the years, the regional differences have completely evaporated. So now the East and the South are just as high as the West, in saying that Ukraine should become a fully functioning democracy. This is the takeaway. Next, please. So breaking that down, what I think is most interesting here, what people believe over time to be the key characteristics of a fully functioning democracy. What I would call your attention to here is the gray line, which shows that those who believe that citizens' interests are being represented by political parties has declined precipitously from 31% to 5%. Now that's partly war because, as Steve said, politics goes away in war and you just focus on fighting the war. And indeed, there's been martial law, and under martial law, there has not been political campaigning, but it started before that. So what this shows, I think, is that we have work to do to strengthen political parties in Ukraine. And certainly, I don't think, if you looked at the US, I think you'd see a pretty similar low estimation of our part. Next slide. Okay, so here we look at trust in major state institutions over time. Zelensky, of course, has got those peaks when he was first elected and then during the full-scale invasion. But overall, the picture is also of pretty low trust in the courts and the parliament. So even though people believe that it's important that Ukraine become a democracy, they understand that these institutions have to improve and that they have to hold them accountable. And again, I think you'd see, if you looked at the rating for the US Congress, it's, I don't know where on this chart, low among Americans. Next slide. Okay, this is another thing that we measure over time. The bottom line is we ask, should men and women be equally involved in political life? The bottom blue one is whether you think they actually are equally involved, and the orange one is whether you would like to see them equal. And the good news is we see a general upward trend and then a little bit of a drop. We think this is because in wartime, obviously, most of the heroes are going to be men because most of the fighting force is men, and it's just something that you're going to see. But this reminds us that there's work to do in this area. And I would actually expand this a little bit to say there is work to do in terms of bringing into equal and full political participation a lot of groups in Ukraine. And one of them that we're very much focusing on is veterans, which our polling has shown feel politically disenfranchised, that no political party represents them. So it is about women and women's leadership. It's also veterans. It's also IDPs and a number of other groups that emerged during the war. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a picture of a resilient Ukraine. Generational expectations and optimism for the next generation. You can see that even during the full-scale war, Ukrainians remained generally optimistic and resilient. Next slide, please. We have a lot of data on openness towards territorial concessions, sliced and diced a lot of different ways. I just thought I'd show one slide. These are the average people who agree or disagree with the statement, Crimea becomes a recognized part of Russia and Donbass never returns to the Ukrainian authorities. That's the definition of territorial concessions. So you can see the lines. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are our research priorities for the future. I want to take a moment here to say that NDI does research in Ukraine, but we also do our full gamut of activities, just like IRI. We have retained a combined staff and consultants of about 20 people. We have NED funding already for working to strengthen parliament, to strengthen political parties. We have been fortunate to get private funding to help us create a roadmap for some of the changes that need to be made before elections. Steve outlined some of them. There's enormous logistical challenges with including IDPs and the people abroad. There are political consensus building challenges with an election law that everybody feels is fair. There are political inclusion challenges with making sure that veterans feel that they have a party that represents them, et cetera. And we have a roadmap going forward, and we are looking for funding to implement it. We do have some, but we are hopeful of getting additional. And we'll also continue to be doing research. Here are some of the things that I mentioned we'll be working on. Inclusion of veterans, women, trust in institutions, perceptions of corruption, Very important expectations of post-war political leadership and priorities for Ukraine. We expect social cohesion, what we call social cohesion, which means dealing with the inevitable tensions that are going to arise during and after the ceasefire, because it will in no case please everybody, and there will certainly be social tensions. We want to be getting ahead of measuring that and seeing how we can help Ukrainian authorities keep the country together, cohesive, and moving forward towards democracy. Thank you.
Then so panelists, including you both, keep track of the questions that people answer. And then we will, after we've got the questions, do the answers, and then want to do the grading, or do we get into it? No, we, how's our grade? Katie's already indicated that we're elected to do that, but we will.
It's a matter of policy.
Well, best time of the whole panel, which is your questions, your comments, your thoughts about these issues or any of the issues that we please. Who would like? All the way in the back. Well, you're gonna do this? No. Okay. I see all the way in the back. Not even at the table. Go ahead. And your microphone and state your name, and so is microphones coming? Microphone is coming. Stand by. State your name so we can remember what your question is, and we will get an answer.
My name is Adrian, and this is for Ms. Fox. So as we've seen in Europe with elections in Poland and Romania going distinctly towards sort of more anti-democratic candidates, and you have sort of anti-democratic strongholds in, say, Serbia with Vučić, Orban in Hungary, as you're seeing, the Le Pen movement gain strength. Is there how do we preserve democracy in Ukraine as the rest of Europe is sort of moving towards an anti-democratic direction?
Adrian, good question. Hang on, Katie, that will be yours when we come to it. There's another, yes, right here. There's a mic coming. There you are.
Yuri Kimiotic with AFABN. My question's a general one to whoever would like to answer it. In Soviet Ukraine and independent Ukraine, one of the largest and earliest formed independent political parties was the Veterans Association of Afghanistan. My question is, will we see something like that in post-war Ukraine, or will veterans be more inclined to go back to their respective political parties? And attachment, if you could expand on what the political state of veterans and current service members is, where do they lean on topics, if you have that information? Thank you.
Excellent question, Yuri. Yuri, is that right? I get that name right? Good. Right here, good. Yep.
Hello, my name's Taras. One question that I do have is about election integrity and security. There's not only the question of not having a bomb fall on your head while you're at the voting booth, but if there are online elections or if there's just elections in general, how can we verify that the ballots that are made are secure? Over the past 10 years, there's always been the question of whether the numbers are accurate. And now with millions of people in Europe, the United States, and other parts of the world, how can we make sure that every vote not only counts, but is what the vote is? Thank you.
Good question, Taras. Other questions? Yes.
Thomas Lang, Rebuilding Ukraine Association. How can we be assured that we know that elections are important as soon as the war is over, but how can we be sure that Ukraine is ready to receive the international funding that's going to come into it? If you're not preparing now, when the war is over, that means it'll take months or even maybe a year or two before the donors feel comfortable funding projects into Ukraine. What's it going to take for them to look for it now?
Very good. Thank you, Thomas. Other questions? Yeah, please, the governor. There's a mic coming right here. You do.
I'm focusing and will later on focus on the politics of this battle, because the truth is all of it's politics, all of it, including the war. But right now we don't hear but one voice, it seems to me, in the United States. We only hear one voice coming out of Ukraine, one voice, and that's Zelensky. What can we do to get additional Ukrainian voices into the political discussion? Because that's going to be pivotal in terms of American support.
Good question, Governor. Other questions? If not, then I'm going to then start with Adrian and Katie. This is directed to you. You want to take that first one? Good. Yes. Yeah. Good. And real close to you. Yeah.
Is that good?
That's good.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, that's a very good question. This is how I would answer. I think because Ukraine has been fighting a war with a neighbor that it identifies as autocratic, as anti-democratic, because it suffered so many sacrifices in that war, I don't think that there is the same danger as there is in, say, a Romania or France of overtly closer. Okay, of an overtly non-democratic candidate winning office. What I think the danger to democracy is after the war is that inevitably there are going to be disagreements among Ukrainians. As I said, there's a danger that the veterans may not, there's a lot of groups that may not be happy with the terms of the ceasefire. The veterans feel politically disengaged as it is. The reconstruction monies are going to, difficult decisions going to be made on how they're distributed. So there's going to be tensions, and they're going to be public because that's what democratic politics is. And I see a situation in which the Kremlin exploits that to say, failed state, they can't make decisions. They're arguing with each other. People are demonstrating in the streets, which they may well be, and really exploits that situation. And unfortunately, the pushback from the US against that kind of behavior is not what it used to be. Can I also answer the new parties question?
Sure.
No, you didn't say new parties, but you're absolutely right.
The governor's question, other voices? Yeah.
Yes, we need to bring other voices to the fore. Political pluralism is absolutely key. That is the priority for restoring, strengthening Ukrainian democracy. And NDI is going to be working with not only opposition parties, but a lot of new movements that have emerged in the war.
Okay, thank you. Others may have opportunities to talk about that. So Yuri's next question was on veterans. Steve, you can talk about that. Are the veterans going to play a big role in the elections, whatever they have?
We assess that, yes, veterans will play a huge role in future political processes in Ukraine. It's a large number of people. First of all, we'll be testing this question in the poll that I mentioned that we'll shortly be fielding. But our expectation is there will be movements, perhaps a political party led by veterans that would compete in national elections. And we think that that would be helpful. Again, returning veterans, we assess, are going to be initially very happy, as veterans are, to be home. But if they perceive that the reconstruction of Ukraine is not happening quickly, or other matters are not happening, there's going to be dissatisfaction and a willingness to compete politically. So we're prepared to do this. I've had two guys serving at the front for the last 3 years that had our political party programming in our Kiev office. And so they are going to be very much focused on helping new parties, veterans-focused parties, compete politically in Ukraine. So that's the way we assess that. I'll hold off on answering any other questions.
Yeah, well, Steve, while you're there, Taras's third question was on election security, online, other security.
Okay, we all know paper ballots are used in Ukraine. There has been speculation that perhaps in post-war Ukraine that the DIA app or some other application might be used. Again, there are lots of arguments for going to electronic voting? Lots of arguments against. The primary argument would be that Russia would seek to somehow disrupt any sort of electronic system that Ukraine might utilize, cast doubt on the outcome. So it's a very tricky proposition. Right now, this is at the discussion phase. I don't see any serious effort by the current Central Election Commission to undertake electronic voting. But again, that would be contingent upon the Rada possibly adopting legislation that would allow for electronic voting. So we'll have to see. Right now, it's speculation.
Thanks, Steve. So Thomas had the fourth question. Bo, this was clearly for you, I believe. Thomas asked, is Ukraine ready to receive this reconstruction assistance?
They're not, and they know it. They have been asking for help on getting ready to receive it. I'll give you one concrete example. There's Ukrainian special transportation troops that are kind of the equivalent of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And they've been working with the U.S. Corps of Engineers and also with the British Royal Engineers on what they call capacity building. So right now, very much the Ukrainian Corps is focused on performing combat missions, laying mines, clearing mines, obstacles, a lot of times fighting as infantry. And they want to and realize they need to transition into U.S. Army Corps of Engineer, which is really a very giant project management office that manages, billions of dollars of contracts for critical U.S. infrastructure. They want to get there, but they certainly do not have the skill set, and they want to engage more deeply. And we need U.S. funding for the U.S. engineers to do that want to provide that mission.
Well, thank you. Katie's already started to answer the governor's question about other voices, but let me just say, Governor, two things. One is, I was in Odessa a week and a half ago. We got 5 minutes. I hear you. 5 minutes, both sides. Okay, and we got to vote. So you guys be prepared to vote. Bo, you as well. But in Odessa a week and a half ago, that was my 10th visit to Ukraine since the big war started. I've heard the same thing over and over from opposition parties, including I had a long time with President Poroshenko a week and a half ago, who is out there doing great things in support of the army, in support of a particular brigade, the 93rd Brigade, counter drones. And he took us out and demonstrated this new, I don't know how new it is, but this is sophisticated technology that he's donating out of his own money to the 93rd Brigade. And and he says the same thing, which is, we're not ready for elections now. We don't want to do elections now. He's not eager to start this. He is eager to have a unified Ukraine present itself to the country, but in particular to the Russians, a unified Ukraine to oppose the Russians, unified Ukraine to accept assistance from Europeans and from the Americans. That's really important to President Poroshenko and others, and the other opposition candidates that Steve mentioned early on, who will emerge when the time comes. But I'm thinking that it makes sense to see a unified Ukraine right now, as opposed to multiple voices talking about these kind of things. So that's my view on this thing. But you please, Steve.
Yeah, I would just support the ambassador's argument. Yes, these political party leaders have decided to remain united in the face of this war. We all know the political frictions between Mayor Klitschko and the president. We all know about the investigations of President Poroshenko, the sanctions being imposed against Poroshenko. There are tensions, but to their credit, all of the opposition party leaders that I listed earlier, and I just met with all of them recently at the EP Congress, Klitschko, Poroshenko, and also Tymoshenko. They all say the same things, like, we have our differences, but we are going to remain united. We're going to support President Zelensky in the course of this war. So I think that's to their credit that they have not really publicly aired their disagreements, but instead have remained united in the face of this war. But as the ambassador pointed out, as soon as martial law concludes, elections are called, everything's going to open up. There's going to be a lot of different voices competing in national elections.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts or comments on that, Orest? If you want. Otherwise, we're going to go to votes.
Let's vote.
We go to votes. All right. All right. Katie, you've already decided you're not voting. Orest, you can vote.
I just want to
please.
think about trajectory of countries like Hungary, Romania, Poland. Well, Romania, we were sort of saved by the skin of our teeth because it could have been a worse outcome. But one thing I just want to add to what Katie said. In terms of a grade, look. Okay. Usually people complain of me being too loud, but anyhow, so, in terms of a grade, well, first of all, those of you who heard my presentation, obviously this doesn't count, but on the occupied territories, like I mentioned, Freedom House ranked them worse than all of the 187 countries and 13 territories covered in the world. So, that I think speaks for itself. In terms of Ukraine itself, 3 is like neither improvement nor, staying the same. I'm going to give it a 4. Maybe it's a little bit of a grading of a curve. But, when you look at the fact that it's martial law and the challenges of war, and also take a look, at our own record or the record of some other countries who don't have those challenges, then I'll easily give them a 4. And that may even be a little conservative.
A 4. Okay. Bo, you can vote.
I think grading under a curve is the only way to grade. And a country that's facing an existential threat, and for such a long time, I would give them a 4+.
Right, 4+. And Steve.
Well, I'm a Georgetown man, and we don't have grade inflation at Georgetown. So I can't give anybody a mark of 5, including Ukraine, even though I love it dearly. We're going to give it a 4.5 for 2 key reasons. Number one, as I said earlier, the opposition political parties have remained united in the face of this war and have supported the government, the president, and the armed forces. And also 4.5 to the Ukrainian people for forestalling this demand that Ukraine hold elections now, instead saying in public opinion polls by IRI that we must wait until the conclusion of the war. So I'm going to give the government and the people of Ukraine 4.5.
I am too, 4.5. Walter, back to you. And thank the panelists. Very nice job.
Keep things in check with the second panel. So we will have the coffee break after this session. Please, let's get assembled for this panel as quickly as possible so we can stay on time. Awesome. Okay, and again, I'm going to be calling up Ambassador Bill Courtney is up already. I'm going to be calling Dr. Anders Åslund, Dr. Howard Shatz. I think I saw him here somewhere. Yes. And Tymofiy, is he on? Yeah, Dr. Mylovanov is on, and then Jon Queen is here. Yes? And you need to give that to our, thank you.
Started
Yes.
while people are getting settled down by reading short biographies of the folks who are online and don't see the biographies, which folks here do have. Anders Åslund is currently chairman of the Economics, Education, and Research Consortium, senior fellow at the Stockholm Free World Forum, and adjunct professor at Georgetown University. He has been focusing on the systemic transition from a centrally planned economy to a market economy in the post-Soviet space for over 30 years. Tymofiy Mylovanov is associate professor of economics at the University of Pittsburgh and the president of the Kyiv School of Economics. Professor Mylovanov is a co-founder of Vox Ukraine, a group of global economists working on policy problems in Ukraine. From 2019 to 2020, he was Minister of Economic Development, Trade, and Agriculture. Howard Shatz is a senior economist at the Rand Corporation and a professor at the Pardee Rand Graduate School, which is School of Public Policy. He specializes in international economics and national security. His Rand research has included Ukraine's post-war reconstruction and economic issues related to Russia's 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine, economic competition, and the United States' role in the global economic order, and several other issues. And then Jon Queen, who's our commentator, is a businessman who has lived and worked in Ukraine for almost 15 years prior to becoming a board member of the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation. During his time in Ukraine, Jon helped manage 2 Ukrainian investment banks, and he co-owned and operated 12 Ukrainian biomass heat power stations. So welcome. Glad to have all of you. Let me ask that you keep your opening remarks to maybe 8 minutes or something so we can have more time for a question. So Anders, let's start with you.
Thank you very much, and pleasure to be here again, and thank you also for the invitation. Would like to give a brief idea of, do you hear me?
Just take this. No, it's on. You just
Okay, do you hear me now? Thank you. Generally, what has happened during the war with the Ukrainian economy is surprisingly good. If we take the growth rates decline of 29% when the Russians attacked, essentially because of a new occupation. And then in 2023, a surprising recovery of 5.5%, and then a bit more than 3% last year. This year, it will be less, probably 1.5% growth. And what is needed for the Ukrainian economic performance? Essentially, there are 3 things that need to be done. Ukraine needs $42 billion a year in foreign assistance to cover a budget deficit of about 20% of GDP. And the second thing is that the shipping over the Black Sea functions, because 90% of what Ukraine exports is commodities, and they are not profitable unless there is a cheap shipping going, and that has functioned well since September 2023. And the third thing that is needed is electricity. And there were some problems last year, which reduced the growth in relation to 2023. But that seems to be less now. Something that is not much noticed, that is that the Russians are not bombing the 3 nuclear power stations that are operating, and they provide 55 to 60% of the electricity. And the 2 companies that are working with the repairs and having the net functioning, state-owned Ukrenergo and privately owned DTEC, are functioning amazingly well. So these are real heroes in the current economic situation. I'm myself on the advisory council of DTEC. And I should say also DTEC has lost 300 employees that have been killed in the war, mostly as soldiers, but some while doing repairs. And these 3 things are basically working. So what is the problem now? Well, the budget is financed, but Ukraine had last month an inflation year over year of 15.9%, and that is not good enough. And the central bank, which has operated very well previously, maintains an interest rate of 15.5%, which is less than the inflation. This is not right. And I don't know why the National Bank has fallen asleep while inflation has increased from a low of 5%, a bit more than a year ago. Something needs to be done. Otherwise, the Minister of Finance is functioning wonderfully. Ukraine has a 4-year IMF program since the spring of 2023. And Ukraine has gone through 8 quarterly reviews with flying colors. The IMF is hardly ever as positive as it has been on Ukraine's performance. And this refers to the Minister of Finance, to the National Bank, and the state fiscal service. So this is functioning quite well. The Russians always complain about corruption in Ukraine for no good reason, because on Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, Russia has been steadily ranked around 142 for the last decade or so, out of 180 countries. Ukraine used to be down there a decade ago, but now Ukraine ranks 105, and it has been steady improvements on the Corruption Perception Index, which is very much because of all the reforms. I should also mention that the European Union is as positive on Ukraine as the IMF, because Ukraine is now carrying out a lot of various reforms, which should be done, and they are being done in the midst of the war. You can say that there's so much money underway that you had better perform, but still Ukraine does it. So how will Ukraine now manage with the US not providing any money in the future? President Biden's administration did something very smart last December. It passed on $20 billion that was based on yields on the Ukrainian frozen the Russian frozen assets. And this $20 billion was passed on by the Biden administration to the World Bank so that Trump cannot draw it back. And this money is now part of the financing of that the West provides Ukraine. For the last 2 years, Ukraine has got about $100 billion a year, which is what Ukraine needs to keep going. Say 40 billion for the budget, 50 billion in arms, and 10 billion in humanitarian assistance. And Ukraine will get that much this year. And since the US is now providing less than previously, Europe has stepped up, and presumably Europe can continue to do so. And I don't think that anybody's really expecting that the US will do anything more for Ukraine, unfortunately. And what should be done? There is $200 billion of frozen Russian assets sitting in Belgium in the Euroclear banking system. And this should be taken and given to Ukraine. In that case, Ukrainian financing should be fine. Thank you.
Your comments about the improvement in the corruption perceptions index almost raised the question, or have economic reforms accelerated once the full-scale war started?
Yes.
Howard.
It's always difficult to follow Anders, but maybe I can fill in some details and say up front that I certainly concur with him. Ukraine's macroeconomic performance, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Economy have been absolutely terrific. In terms of macroeconomic developments, so growth is going to slow, is expected to slow this year. Every agency that does projections calls for it to be much lower because of two big constraints. One is Russian attacks on energy infrastructure. That's been hurting. The second is labor shortages, both because of people involved in the war and people leaving Ukraine. But what moderates this is external support is ample. So Europe has the Ukraine facility, and it has been dispersing money to Ukraine every few months. That means Ukraine, it judges Ukraine to be meeting the requirements of the Ukraine plan. Right, so that's a very good sign. U.S. support has disappeared since January, but the EU has certainly picked up. Most of that pickup has come from the Nordic countries as well as the UK. Less so from Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, the big economies. And so, when we talk about does Europe have the continued capacity to make up for a U.S. lack of financing, certainly if the big economies are not giving much now, there's lots of room for that to increase. And included in that money is also Japan. Don't forget the extraordinary revenue acceleration. That's the repackaging of profits from Russian assets. That's a G7 effort, and Japan has come up with $3 billion as well under that. The last point about its macroeconomy is right now we're going through a quite unsettled time with potential oil market disruptions. Ukraine is actually quite insulated from that. So that should not affect things all that much. Let's move to the EU. So since we met last year, accession negotiations have opened with the EU, and that's a very good sign. In addition, with the EU, the Ukraine electricity grid is now synchronized with that of EU countries. So that's permanent, right? It's delinked from Russia. It's got more capacity for electricity trade. In terms of accession, Ukraine has approved negotiating positions for the internal market cluster, for the external relations cluster, and it has adopted roadmaps for reform on justice, governance, and democracy. So things are moving forward. And you have to admire Ukrainian policymakers because they have the requirements of the Ukraine facility, the Ukraine plan, which is what's unleashing current EU funding. They have the requirements of EU accession. They have IMF requirements, and they have World Bank requirements all at once, which is more external requirements than most governments would have to handle. The one dark spot with the EU is in June, the EU imposed or reimposed tariffs on agricultural products. And agricultural products comprise a very large portion of Ukraine's exports. That's currently under negotiation. Hopefully there will be something new that emerges. In terms of investment climate, we working? We are. There is now stepped up support from European Investment Bank and EBRD. So again, external financing seems to be good. And reports are that they are improving their capacity on reconstruction coordination across the government and the economy. EU has just started export credit facilities, which should make doing business with Ukraine lower risk, which will be helpful. But the risk profile in Ukraine remains highly differentiated. If you look at the maps put out by the data platform of the National Security and Defense Council, you can see that most of the attacks are still in the east and center. The west is relatively unscathed, although if you compare year on year, April, May attacks are really much worse this year than they were in previous years, but about on par with September, October attacks. Sure. Let's go with some of the problems that Ukraine is facing. One is Russian destruction of energy infrastructure, labor shortages, the complex requirements that I mentioned, and exports to EU in terms of tariffs. Another aspect which we haven't really talked about at these sessions is external debt. So Ukraine has defaulted on 3 different forms of debt. One are GDP warrants, one is a commercial loan, and then there's a third loan, a Euro bond for Ukraine or for the electric utility. These are all small payments, right? So they shouldn't really affect the economy, except Ukraine is in default, and that's something going forward that government will have to take account of. I also want to go through corruption. So it's a good story. What I usually look at with Transparency International is I look at Ukraine's peer group. So Europe, basically Europe, the Caucasus, the Balkans, where would an investor look? Ukraine, among that group of 45 countries, was dead last from 2012 to 2015. It has since risen. It was tied with Russia in 2016. By 2024, it was number 39, tied with Serbia. So, not at the top, but we see a steady progression, which is testament to the reforms. What's left to do? The big gaps left to do, and Ukrainian policymakers know this, are improved tax compliance, reform of the reduction of tax evasion, and continued reform of the customs system, which appears to be going slowly. 2 last comments. The U.S. mineral deal, it's still not quite there. It appears, if you read the documents, it appears that there still needs to be a more carefully defined limited partnership agreement on top of the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. But both parties do seem to be taking it seriously, and Ukraine is now moving towards opening bidding on a lithium field. There is potential there. One of the kind of, it's not hidden because the documents are public, but one of the things mentioned in passing is that U.S. weapons transfers to Ukraine will be counted as capital injections in the fund. And should the administration decide that it wants to increase support for Ukraine again, that gives it political cover. We're not just giving things away. And it also could open the door to that renewed support. Finally, what to look for going forward. We have the Ukraine Recovery Conference coming up in Rome. Past recovery conferences have been somewhat disappointing. This one may be interesting because there's going to be a special side effort for businesses with workshops on about 10 different sectors and other smaller efforts to try to spur investment. So that's something we should watch for in July to see if anything positive comes out of that.
Yesterday, the head of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, had an op-ed in the Financial Times talking essentially about how this is a great opportunity for the euro to gain ground relative to the dollar as a reserve currency and used for international transactions. But you have the sense that the ECB is reluctant to have to see the principle of the euro clear money seized because they're afraid it will undermine confidence in the euro. What's your thought on that?
That's been a constant fear because so what they say is that European banking system is not as strong as the US system. Everybody is threatening to leave the dollar, leave the euro. Where are they going to go? No one wants to hold RMB. Wealthy Chinese don't want to hold RMB. They're moving their money out of China. You could buy more gold, but gold prices are rising. I think European financial regulators are talented enough that they can support their banks, and the talk of pulling a deposits out of banks is probably more just talk now.
Great, thank you. Tymofiy.
Hi, hello. Yeah, thank
Yes,
you.
please.
All right, great, thank you. Yeah, so I think Anders has done a wonderful introduction to the situation in economy in Ukraine. I just want to add a couple of items to it. So the IMF program is an anchor program, and we indeed passed it with flying colors, which is an unbelievable positive achievement during the wartime. The model of the IMF program is built on unprecedented methodology because the IMF itself usually or never finances countries in war, because basically the methodology which ensures financial sustainability doesn't work. It doesn't apply. So this time they developed an additional or new methodology which generates different scenarios and then take a weighted average of them. And this is where the friction potentially can come in. The methodology requires that there's sufficient probability that Ukraine will exit from the war. And now these assumptions about when the Ukraine is going to exit from the war are being challenged. Because they are, end of 25, sometime in 26. If, and that appears to be increasingly more likely, that Russia is not serious, or, I'm being very diplomatic here, giving it the maximal possible chance. If Russia is not serious about ceasefire and negotiations, peace, or the conditions under which it is possible, then the assumptions underpinning the IMF program are going to be challenged. And that will generate methodological issues that will either require some amendments or maybe change to the program or restart of the program. That will require the US position on this to underwrite the risk potentially, unless Europe steps in, and then potentially can trigger the support and some conditionality from the European support. So this is a very roundabout way to say, to basically talk about the elephant in the room. If the war continues, and the probability of this is reasonably high, Ukraine will be in a difficult economic situation. It also is true not only with respect to the IMF support, it is also true with respect to the European and other support. At this moment, 2026 support, or some of it is uncertain, and 2027 too, because the European support was front-loaded, and the amounts over time are decreasing. So the continuation of the war also puts pressures on the labor markets, specifically on people, and more importantly, recent extended attacks with hundreds and sometimes 400-500 of drones a night on a specific city. They signal a sort of new escalation in the Russian campaign to terrorize civilians, which would add additional pressure on the labor market from the economic perspective, but also will put pressure just on people. So these are the challenges that Ukraine is facing. Ukraine is working on innovative ways to counter the drone attacks, and I think we will see some successes soon. And I'm pretty sure that the financing will be supported and will be found for the next years, even if the war continues. But it's not a given at this moment, and it requires some perhaps possibly even creative methodological adjustments to the existing programs. And that's what I would stop. I remain cautiously optimistic, even in the worst case scenario of a prolonged war, that the Ukrainian economy has demonstrated its own resiliency, but funding will be challenged, but it should be found. Anders has pointed out the other elephant in the room, the Russian assets. And I think either the Russian assets or some other type of support is going to prove crucial for Ukraine if the war continues substantively longer beyond the beginning of 2026.
Well, thank you, Tymofiy. Timothy, we've seen amazing work by startups in Ukraine, in drones, electronic warfare, and other areas. Is part of the reason why Ukraine is doing so well compared to Russia is that business conditions for startups are better in Ukraine than in Russia?
Yeah, so the challenge that you see in defense tech is you have to incorporate civilian entrepreneurship kind of approach with the very hierarchical order structure of military. This has in Ukraine certain advantages because as the beginning of the war has shown, as the successful counteroffensive of Kharkiv and Kherson, or successive defense of Kyiv, has shown that Ukraine is very good at relying on horizontal relationships between military units, even within military. That gives Ukraine an advantage in innovation, that gives Ukraine an advantage in defense, and in agility to respond quickly to developing situations. It also has disadvantages because with a lot of decentralization, you have more difficulty coordinating on specific type of systems, on specific type of production. And that's why we see that Russia sometimes, when it gets on specific unit, it can improve, let's say Shatz. It can produce it in mass and scale up production. So these are different systems competing, more decentralized, more free market, more competitive, more democratic system with a more hierarchical Soviet-style system in Russia. So Ukrainian system is more Western, Russian system is more Soviet, and they're competing, and that of course gives an advantage in innovation to Ukraine.
Great, thank you. Jon, you give us some on-the-ground perspective.
Thank you very much. Okay. So just full disclosure and warning, I'm not an economist, I'm a businessman. So I'm going to be focused more on a distinct project here, while my colleagues here can speak more to the macro and the broader details. And what I'd like to do is cast everybody's mind into the future. We're here to talk about not just Ukraine's current situation, but what it can look like after the war and its reconstruction. And the port project that I'm working with, it's a Ukrainian initiative. I'm an American, but I'm simply part of the management team. This project is by Ukrainians for Ukraine. This is the Berezan Port Project, which will be one of the largest infrastructure projects, not just in Ukraine, but it's a very ambitious project. It'll be one of the largest projects on the Black Sea, period. And the idea of it and the concept is to not only reindustrialize Ukraine and bring back its industrial capacity that's has been lost, unfortunately, due to the way the Russians have waged war, but also to provide a magnet for Ukrainians to return home and for Ukrainians that are already home to provide them with a great economic future that can provide for their kids and their grandkids as well. If I can go to the first slide. So what this project is, we're talking about a fully integrated industrial hub where it's going to be a 25-kilometer port on the Black Sea with a roughly 10,000-acre industrial zone, tax-advantaged industrial zone attached to it that will be a fully integrated deep-sea cargo port, industrial area, as I said, tax-free, with air, rail, and trucking capacity as well as a smart city with data centers. Why are we doing this? Well, simply, Ukraine has never had the opportunity, if you look at the country, to build something like this before, because it inherited its existing port system in the Soviet times. And those were built for different reasons. They were built for labor force, and everything was centrally planned. You never had business itself determine where would we put the industrial production of the country and where would we put the logistics, and how can we wrap it all together into something that can be actually economically make the most sense. And so, unfortunately, with the war in Ukraine and the way that Ukraine has been deindustrialized, we now have the opportunity with a blank slate to actually build things the right way, in a way that will be very kind of attractive, not just for Ukraine and regionally, but for Asia and Europe and worldwide trading partners. Slide, please. This is the overview of the port at a very high level. We're talking about 25 kilometers of port length that can handle up to 120 million tons of annual cargo capacity. an industrial area on 10,000 acres with a tax-free zone will have special legislation based on the best in class available in other countries, and we're taking international advice on that. We have direct sea entrance for Cape-sized vessels, which will be the largest, basically shipping vessels up to 19 meters in depth. And as I said before, it's going to be an all-in-one cargo hub with marine, river, railway, and aviation all tied to it, right next to a huge industrial center where things will be produced and stored. Okay, next slide, please. In terms of the location, we're talking about on the Black Sea to the southeast of Odessa and some of the other large ports. So, sorry, it's actually to the north of the Odessa and other ports. But if you take the next slide, we can phase into where we are. Next slide, please. So we're talking about building something on the bank here of the basically in Limonene area. And it's a protected area, which will allow us to build out a large port unobstructed by neighboring communities or towns. And we have plenty of room to expand. And we also have great rail access to Mykolaiv and airport and everything that we need basically to think about the next 100 years, not even the next 10. Slide. In terms of what the port will physically look like, we're talking, as I said, about 25 kilometers in length with everything from general cargo and oils all the way up to liquefied petroleum gas and liquid natural gas, which is great because Ukraine will need that. And this is one of the places where it can ecologically be stored in a way that makes the most logical sense, both from a business and ecological point of view. So the idea in terms of the location, again, of this port is that it can become a key element to the pan-European tradeway, as well as the pan-Asian tradeway. So here you can look and see some of the existing trade routes, and our port will be able to connect all of them. In the next slide, please. And likewise to the Eurasian tradeway as well. It can be a key cargo transit center between Europe and Asia, providing fast management and easy shipping of goods between continents, not just countries. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned before, one of the key elements of this is not just the physical port, it's the industrial hub, which will come next to it, where we will build billions of dollars of industry with more than 40 industrial plants. We're currently in the process of reviewing and signing MOUs with some companies that have expressed interest in participating and locating some of their heavy industry manufacturing facilities there. And one of the attractive points to this is, as I said, is we're building something with not just sea, but rail, air, and truck capacity. So everyone has all the shipping logistics they need. And that actually can be very interesting, not just in Ukraine, but regionally, to have everything located in such a convenient way. Next slide, please. So we have a kinetic situation with the war in Ukraine. So obviously a lot of this is subject to conditions allowing. But our first phase of cargo port development would basically be the construction of the port and the industrial center without any of the kind of the building inside of the industrial hub for the facilities. It's going to be roughly $800 million. And we can bring this into the first stage, if I can see the next slide, in roughly 2 years. So again, the lighting here is maybe a little challenging, but if you look at the top line, you'll see that the entire investment vision of this could reach up to $60 billion. Now, this includes all of the manufacturing facilities and the businesses that will be surrounded in the industrial hub. It's not just port construction. The port construction infrastructure itself is a roughly $800 million project, which still makes it one of the largest reconstruction projects in the country in the post-war period. And you can see that it's broken out into phases here, but again, there are certain things we can do now and certain things we need to wait for until the war conditions allow. If I can see the next slide. So this goes to my point of what we're able to do now. So technical studies, feasibility studies, sea exploration and soil analysis, things that involve open source data and creation of the consortium. This is what we can do. And what is required is we continue to have talks with investors and production companies to become involved with the port. And this is Bears-on-Port. I can speak further about it if people are interested, but again, it's a very ambitious project, and we feel this is going to be a key part of Ukraine's future. And I'm proud to be working with the Ukrainians in this respect.
Construction of a deep sea port, but it struggled for both political reasons, but also some economic reasons. The issue of a government guarantee for a certain shipping volume for the port has become an issue. In your case, do you need a government guarantee a direct government guarantee for anything like that?
Not so much. And so one point that I would like to emphasize is we are a private project. This is a private concern. So the government is only involved with giving us concessions. And so from our side, when we're talking to capital and we're building ourselves, one of the sponsors of the project is a large Ukrainian sunflower oil manufacturing facility, Sunpro, and they're here today with me. And between them and other parties that we're talking to, we're trying to build this actually from the business side first. And the government will be strictly involved with concessions and things of this nature. In terms of financing, we do not feel that we're going to have a government guarantee on certain volumes in order to finish our fundraising round.
Great, thank you. So we have about 25 minutes left for questions and answers. Let's take a couple questions at a time, then direct them to specific panelists if you prefer or not. Way in the back.
In regard,
it seems to be working.
yeah. Okay. In regards to the harbor, the industrial hub, everything. I spent 40 years working in the Port Newark area up in New Jersey. The Port of New York is run by the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. They lease the land to all the different operators, businesses that are there. Is that basically the same thing that's going to be happening there?
Okay. Let's get one more question. Yes, back here. Oh, you missed him. He's there. Okay.
Zaryckyj with AFAB, and my question goes to the Turkish and Black Sea strategy for economic rebuilding of Ukraine, especially in a future rebuilt Crimea, refurbished Sevastopol, and the future joint refurbishing of Odessa, which has been talked about. I'm not sure how recently, though, that plan has been coming about, and the future Turkish investments in perhaps your project and their firms. Thank you.
Okay, and there's a third question, I think, over here. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Max Pajor. I'm with the Energy Policy Research Foundation. As far as your discussion, does the 3Cs initiative, as it was originated by Poland and Croatia, does it offer any sort of opportunities, any sort of backstop, any sort of financing for the things that you've discussed here?
Okay, let's ask our panelists to address these issues. John, I think you have part of it.
So to start with, the first question, I believe, was the structure in terms of how the industrial companies would participate in the project. Yes, I mean, we're creating the industrial hub and we're working on getting the legislation going. The land will be owned by the project and people will be able to build there on favorable terms. And so as the MOUs evolve, we'll have a better understanding of what exactly type of commercial arrangements we can have with some of our anchor partners versus some of the later partners. It could evolve, but yes, it's probably going to be in a similar capacity. And I apologize. What was the second question? There was one related to 3Cs initiative, the Turkish investment. Again, like talks are ongoing. We haven't had any specific discussions to my knowledge with Turkish investors. We've been mostly talking with people in other countries, but we would invite obviously any Turkish involvement, since given the proximity and the experience they have also, you know, with ports. And in terms of the 3 Cs initiative, again, there is possibility there for doing some things as a private initiative. A lot of what we do is in the private sector. So we're talking to actual companies, both in logistics as well as manufacturing. That's the main focus for us, as opposed to kind of government and kind of government, quasi-government structures and agreements. But again, we're open to everything, and we're trying to build this project in the right way that can be as inclusive to all interests as possible.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, more questions. Further back. She gave up the microphone too soon.
Thank you very much. My name is Alexander Turan. I'm the president of Svitanok, a Ukrainian-American organization. Currently, we advocate for LNG in Congress. And you've mentioned in terms of the industrial hub in Odessa, the LNG opportunity. Would it include potentially regasification terminal, or would it be only for storage? As you know, Ukraine is positioned in a very, very crucial location for Europe and can be an amazing hub to transfer LNG to the gas, foreign gas, let's say American gas, for example, to Europe through regasification terminals in Ukraine, if those were built.
Exactly to your point. This is something that's the idea and the concept of the plan. It's not just storage, but also regasification. Yes.
And is it a private corporate matter right now that is being discussed, or have you had any encouragement from any government agencies on this idea?
It's private at this point. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Governor Gilmore.
Thomas Lang, Rebuilding Ukraine. How are you finding your relationship with working with the government and changing some of the laws that are going to have to be changed to be able to have a private enterprise interact with business, and creating certification processes and, permitting processes and the whole, like, how's that journey going?
That's an interesting question. So I would say the easiest way to answer that is we have a government representative here with us today. So the port, given the size, has required its own intergovernmental task force in the government, in the Ministry of Infrastructure. And Mykola Vizier, who's the head of that government task force on the Ukraine government side, is here with us today and can speak to anyone offline if you have questions about how we're doing that. But the 20,000-foot overview of that is very carefully, and it's a work in progress. But it's a very important piece of the work, because there's going to have to be new legislation written, and particularly you're going to want best-in-class legislation for a project of this size and importance, because otherwise it's just not going to work.
Governor Gilmore. Oh, it needs to be turned on.
Hello. I'm an audio visual guy. Sorry about that. Listen, this is maybe a naive question, but I'm struck by the presentation of everybody, particularly the port presentation. I'm curious to know whether you can get investors to do anything. Why would anybody, for example, invest in this port when it could end up being a Russian port? What is the dynamic of the war on the economic messaging that you all are sending? Because I don't think I understand that.
Let me get a couple more questions and then we'll turn to our panelists. Yes, over here. No, sorry, over here.
Sorry, just two quick questions. With the current Polish elections that have just passed, the new president is very for the agricultural tariffs that were on the Ukrainian sector. So how do we plan to, or what are the plans currently to overcome the challenges that are faced with that? Is Ukraine destined to be a manufacturing economy? Can't we necessarily transition to other services, and especially the defense industry? With all the innovations going on, I feel like a lot of countries would be interested in purchasing or learning how Ukraine has managed to succeed in difficult conditions. And then,
Right, and the third question in the back.
So Reynolds. I know there's been a lot of questions towards the seaport, and I'm one of them, but would the seaport diminish the economic prosperity of Odessa, which currently is already in place? Because now you have this huge seaport that would be closer to Russia's border, because it's on the towards the east side, and Odessa is a little further towards the west. So would it diminish Odessa's prosperity, economic prosperity, which currently is in place? But
Any more questions? Okay. John?
Okay, starting first question was the effect of the war on discussions with investors. It's obviously it's a big effect, right? So the way that we address that is we have two different categories of investors. We have strategic early stage investors who are interested for maybe different reasons than someone who will come in at a later stage that are interested in the completion of the project. More early stage, the same way with venture capital or other things, you have different categories of investors that look at things in different ways, and they approach risk differently. Some people see risk as opportunity, others see risk as a reason to be cautious. And so without going into each discussion we're having with each different investor, we have different categories. And so at this stage, we're simply at a smaller stage of fundraising. We're focused on feasibility and technical work, which is a smaller amount of money involved. And the people we're talking to there have a different view on it than maybe people they'll be looking to put hundreds of millions of dollars in and want to see the situation stabilized on the ground before they can understand it. But even with those, we're able to have commitment discussions with them, because we're obviously not going to take their money because we can't deploy it. You can have basically MOUs, other discussions to bring people in. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Sure. The second question that I recall is Ukraine's kind of macro direction, whether it's should be focused more on technology or on traditional manufacturing and infrastructure and development. And I think the answer is both. I think what war shows you is you need strategic industry manufacturing for your own safety, whether that's steel or other types of heavy production. You also need innovation to kind of take your country forward. And Ukraine is, I think, it can be an example how both are important. And at this port, yes, we are more focused on the heavy industry side of it, but also, there is a data center and a smart city that will be built as part of this. So we hope to have an innovation hub as well. But Ukraine will definitely need to restore its lost kind of heavy industry and manufacturing capacity in order to build the types of structures for its reconstruction, as well as to provide for its military security and other security, so it doesn't have to import these items. And additional question that I recall is about the impact on Odessa. We don't anticipate that this is going to have a severely negative impact on Odessa, because Odessa port will continue to operate. But Odessa has certain constraints just due to the fact that you can't really expand on that port. It's already in a thriving city that's already has a large population. It's the way the Soviets built their factories near where the people were, because the factories and the infrastructure was there to provide employment, and not just for capitalistic means or business sense means. So Odessa will continue to operate and to thrive, but I believe that Ukraine misses a lot of international opportunities because it doesn't have the type of world-class port that we would have. We'll also have our own constraints. We'll also have our own maximum volumes. So I don't believe that we're going to necessarily impact the other ports. I believe that we're going to create a magnet for Ukraine to become a more important strategic center for international trade.
Oh, Tymofiy and then Anders.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to add to this question about service versus manufacturing technology. I think it's a very important angle to ask. And I think there is some kind of misperception potentially, because it's very easy to think about the drones or defense tech coming out from Ukraine as a sort of manufacturing issue. In fact, it is not the manufacturing issue. It's a very rapid innovation cycle. It's a focus on small platforms. And it is focused on edge application of civilian technologies. So it is more of entrepreneurship value and maybe service value. So it's data, it's specific use of technology, it's the immediate feedback which drives what is happening in Ukraine in defense tech. And different companies in defense tech think about it differently, but the bigger companies really think about it as data and service company, that they will provide now technological solutions to specific targets. And in fact, the recent spiderweb operation is exactly example of this, where the tech was developed specifically for an operation. Rather than it was a usual tech used in a certain way. So the future is that the innovation will lie in algorithms, in data processing, in a specific combination of technologies, rather than in manufacturing itself, at least in defense industry. And defense industry is driving a lot of Ukrainian economy right now. There is, of course, a different type of industry potentially, and it's the one associated with the minerals deal. So with the minerals deal, there would be, if the deals go through, there will be some refinement potentially. And this refinement would require more classic manufacturing. So yes, the answer is still the same, both, but it's definitely not the right way to think about as a defense tech push, creating a purely manufacturing environment in Ukraine.
Thank you, Timofey. Anders.
Thank you. Let me touch on several of the questions. On the port issue, Ukraine needs more ports and it needs to have them competitive. The best port now is Pivdeny. Odessa is a lousy state port, and Chernomorsk is the third port that are functioning. So I think that it's highly desirable to have a new private port. You need more competition in order to avoid bad practices, which Odessa's port has for a very long time been famous for. Governor Gilmore's questions about foreign direct investment, what happens is what you would expect. There are two characteristics of the foreign investments that is taking place now. It's mainly in the West, and it's mainly people who have already invested in Ukraine. And it's the locals that lead. DTEC is now building a wind energy plant for $400 million, very close to Odessa. So this is taking place. And if you look upon wind and solar energy, they are perfect in this situation because it's not worthwhile for the Russians to bomb them. It's worthwhile to bomb a bigger power station, but not wind and solar energy. And they are also decentralized, so you don't get problems with the grid with those. And in agriculture, you're seeing a lot of investment, but it's heavily concentrated to the six westernmost oblasts, and it's done by people like Cargill and as well as by locals. On the nature of the economy, I think that Timofey answered very well, but let me take the Polish agricultural tariffs. When you pass the border between Ukraine and Poland, you come from wonderful, well-managed big fields in Ukraine of 100 hectares or so to Polish lousy fields of 1 or 2 hectares each that are completely mismanaged. So Poland will have a big problem regardless of what happens with its agriculture. And for Ukraine, it's really a matter of exporting to wonderful places like Egypt, which unfortunately Ukraine has lost market share to the Russians now because Ukrainian shipping did not function for some time. It's better for Ukraine to focus on market to the south and to the east rather than to Europe. It will be a problem, however, but Ukrainian agriculture is so far superior to what you see in Central Eastern Europe. And I think that Tymofiy answered very well when it comes to economic structure. Ukraine is outstanding when it comes to high tech now. And before the war, it was mainly software development. Ukraine has very many good engineers, and that's what you need for economic development. Thank you. Yeah, okay, take this.
Got it. Thanks. A few more things for Governor Gilmore. Ukraine has worked very hard to try to differentiate risk, to show investors that risk is different throughout the country. This includes working with Marsh McLennan, creating a data platform where you can look at attacks at a very, very detailed level on a monthly basis. International development banks and development agencies around Europe and the United States have also been pretty good about providing risk insurance. Not great. A big promise of the London Recovery Conference 2 years ago was that the G7 would get together and create this magic risk insurance facility. After agreeing to that, they all kind of went away and didn't do much of anything. So that's undone. On trade on Poland, it's important to remember that trade is an EU competency. It's not a national competency. And the European Commission and the EU have been pretty good at pushing countries into doing what they think is good for the EU. That doesn't tell us what will end up, but the Commission itself will be heavily involved in this. Last word on industry. Ukraine actually needs more industry. Relative to European economies, the percentage of the economy that's industry and manufacturing is quite low. So the high-tech aspect that people talked about is going to be probably the most important. That's what's going to lead to productivity and growth, but it needs industry as well for employment and other purposes. It'll be beneficial.
Thank you, Howard. It's now time for voting. Anders, 1 to 5. How is the Ukrainian economy doing, given the circumstances?
4.5.
4.5. Good. Howard.
I'll go
4. Tymofiy.
Yeah, I don't know what to add. I think I just want to basically reinforce that our optimistic view that the war will be over and the economy will rebound. This is how we're thinking about is a real. Sorry.
Is that a 4 or a 4 plus?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I just think that we need to be ready for a scenario in which the US walks away completely from Ukraine. Ukraine relies on Europe. Europe has internal frictions, and the war continues because Putin doesn't want to offer any reasonable demands, and so that's an economic scenario in which Ukraine will have to continue to exist as a state and survive as a state. And so it's a very, very different environment from the one we discussed today here. Because this discussion today implicitly assumes that ceasefire will be achieved within, let's say, 6-12 months. And I just want to reinstate it. That's not given, and it would be good if it happened. Let's stay optimistic, though.
Okay, so that's a 4.25. John.
So I'll just close on a high note. I'll give it a 4.5, and when the port is built, it'll be a 5. Believe me.
Great. Let's thank our panelists. Thank you. Thank you, Tymofiy. Okay.
We're gonna give everybody a 5-minute coffee break. 5 minutes, I want to reassemble.
15.